Hello and welcome to week 6 lecture. This is a short lecture. You probably be happy about that. All depends on where you're at. I also want to just kind of remind you where we're at in the course. So there's a midterm this week. I'm pretty sure I'm going to see most of you there, which I highly recommend. If you plan to do it another time, then you should let me know that so I can help you to get that set up if it can work. Additionally, you've got this assignment due that you started last week. So that's kind of the reason there's not a lot of content this week. I just assume you kind of got your hands full of projects. So we're going to talk about a couple things. Probably loose ends would be an appropriate term for them. So handful of things. This is going to be particularly short because I think I made a YouTube video on every concept in here. So let's talk about data sanitization. So this is an important thing, and it's hard for you to understand probably, but there's a world full of bad guys out there, and they are interested in causing trouble for the users of your site as well as the data that you're trying to store. So data sanitization is just that idea of protecting your data from malicious users. So there's two tools we're going to talk about. So MySQLi Real Escape String. So this, I have a video on it. This is what we use to sanitize information which is going into our tables. There's all kinds of nasty stuff that users could try to put into our tables, which could do all kinds of things from, kind of hack the information or to even drop the table entirely. And so what I mean by changing the shape of the query is, like, let's say that your query is like select star from users, where so it has like where clauses and such, but what people can do, and I illustrate this in the YouTube video, is they can do things like enter backticks and put in ands and ors and nots and semicolons and drops. And so when you allow people from the web to interact with your table, understand the risks that you need to protect against. So this is used to sanitize information going into your tables. Now, HTML special chars, or the one I showed you in the video, is HTML entities. Right, there's several functions. There's like strip tag functions. There's a bunch of functions which do the other thing. And so this is used to, when you've got information which you're going to display in the user's browser. So think of it as like a two-way street. Like this is storing and this is retrieving, right? This is being pushed into a table. This is being pulled from a table. So whenever you're pulling something from a table, you should sanitize it as well. So understand some of the threats that people could do. So people could put like links into a table, right? Like A tags, and right, you could imagine, or anchor tags, and you can imagine how that could be used to, direct traffic back to some malicious site, or they could even put script tags in there, and they could put JavaScript in, which would attack your users of your site. So there's several functions out there, and oftentimes you'll see this done kind of manually. Like it all depends. I mean, who says that your site shouldn't let people put anchor tags in there, right? I don't know. Maybe it's allowed, maybe it's not, and so there's all kinds of precautions you might want to take. But I demonstrate a little bit of this in the week. So this is something that you need to use every time you get something from a user and you're going to use it to query your table. I expect you to do that. That'll prevent all the nasty stuff potentially from happening. This you should use if you're going to display dynamic content on the user's screen, just so your users are safe from whatever the heck someone might try and do. So kind of abstract stuff, but like I said, I got videos on it. The next very random thing to talk about is option select. We've been doing these for a month now. So, sorry about that, I bumped my microphone. I want to show you, so I made a video about how to dynamically create these. Right? Because creating option selects is pretty painful. I'm sure you all know that now because you've probably created enough where you realize it's kind of tedious. Wouldn't it be nice to automate that process? Additionally, if you think about how this whole thing fits in, option selects are related to tables, right? They really are. So on the back end, someone's entering all this information. And imagine what would happen for STL. What if someone misspelled it SLT? Think about the consequences of having bad data entry. It becomes unsearchable, right? Or let's say, like, I don't know, I'm trying to come up with it. Like for SS, what if they type in SP or something? They can't be allowed, users can't be allowed to enter fields which are inconsistent. It just ruins the searchability of your database. So there's a lot of reasons you might want to do that. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about helper functions and this select option in a minute here. It's going to be like the one real cool piece of content from this lecture. So this is the underlying SQL query which you can use. So select distinct, and so this is the name of the field that you want, and other than that it looks a lot like a select query. Distinct means that it's only going to grab one of each thing. So like for example, in my underlying table over here, like if you did select distinct team, it would grab that STL but not that one, right? It just distinct means at most one. And so you can probably see how that fits together a little bit better now. Helper functions. Helper functions are just, it's a kind of user-created function. So this week I showed you how to create your own functions. Helper function is just a term that we use to describe helpful user-created functions. So things that you do all the time. I have a couple things on this for the week, like for example, a function which formats text as an H1, or a function which makes your arrays display well, or write a function, maybe a function which creates an option select, which is what I'm going to do in a few minutes here. So that's all I'm talking about for the week. Like I said, these are really just pointers to the YouTube videos. I don't really know how to lecture about these things. So let's also look at the rest of the term a little bit, just kind of what's coming up. So some pretty cool stuff coming up. So the next thing that we'll talk about in week 7 is going to be how to display dynamic content. That's one of the most practical applications of PHP. I mean, we've done some cool stuff so far: store information, display information. The next thing we're going to focus on is displaying dynamic content. We've done a little bit of that already, like when we display those dynamic tables based on a query, but we're going to do something slightly different. And then the rest of what we're doing is like how to properly implement a login script, encryption, and sessions and cookies, which is exciting. So that's what we got for the rest of the term. So imagine if you're putting this whole thing together, you can imagine at the end of this course, you're going to be able to create catalog user information, display user information, and implement some basic security protocols. In 233, we start getting into some more, I don't know, I think it's exciting stuff, but you can see by the end of this course, you're going to be able to create a real functional website that does probably just about what you need it to do. Of course, there's exceptions, right? But I think you're not that far away from being far enough to where you could probably fill in those gaps on your own. So anyways, let's do the one bonus content. I did make a YouTube video on this because I thought it was kind of obscure. So let's talk about option selects and helper functions. So let me pull up the option select. So here's the code from my example. So this little piece right here, right? This is essentially where I generated that option select. Now think about this for a minute. Now, I think you're going to appreciate why this is cool. I bet when you watch the video, you're going to be like, hey, I wondered if you could do that, or hey, I could see why you'd want to do that. Probably, I think, of all the things we talked about this week. I mean, you don't ever need to use this tool, but I think you'll appreciate what its value is. So, how can I make a function out of this, right? At the point where you do something that you thought's really cool, and you might do it more than once in your life, well, maybe we can make this into a function. Now, the interesting thing about this is this isn't trivial, right? Here's my helper functions. These were just kind of standard, right? Pass it an array, it makes it pretty. Pass it a number, it tells you if it's a positive whole number. Pass it some text, format it. This doesn't fit into that, right? Because what happens, if I'm going to make a function out of this, what happens in this function is very like, it needs more information. So I'll show you how I would do that. So what I would do is I'd realize like, hey, this right here seems like a reusable piece of code. So I'm going to create a function. And I'm going to call it opt cell, I guess, right? Option select. And I'm going to open up a set of parentheses. And then I'm literally, right? So the details, we'll work all that stuff out in a minute here. But I'm going to take all of that, because I need all of it. I'm just going to paste it in there. Now that's not going to work right? It's definitely not. Because I want this thing to be reusable. I want it to be able to work on multiple tables. I need this thing to be able to work on multiple tables. I need it to be able to grab particular fields. So let's just kind of deal with that one thing at a time. So this process I'm talking about right now is called parameterization. That is the idea of taking a chunk of code and thinking about how can I create a function with parameters that's going to actually do what I need it to do. So my require script, fine, I'll leave it in there. So this query, this thing needs to change. So that is the name of the column that I want. So if I want to deal with that, well, let's just create a parameter for that. And this is going to be called, how about I call it call, right? And instead of team, I just say call, and call So I changed the query. This is the name of the option select itself. Oh, heck, I might as well call that too. And that. I'm actually, oh, I made that cow. That's not going to work so well. I'm actually not sure if I can get away with that. Worst case, I'll just have to deal with it differently. So that got rid of all, right? So see what I'm doing here is I'm taking all the stuff that was very specific to the query and I'm replacing it with general stuff. Now that also needs to change, and that's going to be the name of the table. And so instead of hitters, I'll say table. And at this point, if this works the way I think it does, it's going to, oh, I also need a return statement, right? Because that's something that I need. And I'm say return opt. And now if I want to, I don't want to echo opt, I want to echo a call to the function, which is opt select, opt cell, and I need to pass it the relevant things that it needs. The first thing is the name of the column, and that is team. And the other part was hitters. This is kind of an elaborate example, but I think it's kind of cool. So I'm going to call that function. And you see where team fits in, right? Team is the name of the table, and it's also the name of the option select structure. And hitters is the name of the table. Now let's see how this works. I'm not 100% certain that this is going to work. And so I had a feeling I wasn't going to be able to get away with that, right? Because when you do those curly braces, you're kind of letting it, you're kind of jumping out of double quote realm. So unfortunately, I'm going to do this differently. It's going to become a concatenation exercise. So instead of these curly braces, I'm going to have to do good old-fashioned concatenation, and this will work just fine. So my process here, it's kind of a recipe. Students have appreciated it in the past, but what I do is I take that first curly brace and I replace it with a double quote dot, which is basically what it's doing, and I take the second one and I go dot double quote. That's just kind of the recipe. And now I should be able to have some success with this. I'm not surprised at all that did what it did. So I need to remove those back ticks. And I save. And there's my option select. Right now it's being generated from a function as opposed to just some pre-scripted routine. That might seem pretty difficult, and so the point I wanted to make here is if you want to create really powerful, really useful functions, oftentimes it's not that trivial to come up with the recipe. Right, this was I had to get pretty creative here to come up with, like, how can I create parameters which are going to carry out what I need to have happen here. And you could do whatever you wanted. Let me just show you one other thing. I have an idea here. Something, and how about one more parameter called name, and I could just call this thing NME. Just kind of worrying about what we can customize here and what we can't. So that would be just giving this thing a name of whatever you pass it. Because by default it's going to be called team. Maybe I want to call it TM or something like that. I just wanted to show you what it would be like. So notice the more kind of granularity you want to have happen in this function, the more of that, the more parameters you're going to need. And so it all becomes more complicated, but it's also pretty cool. And so let me view the source, and so I'll show you what I just did. So see, now that thing's called TM, which it was called team a minute ago. And so what we've done now is we've created a function which you can just pass it the name of any table, the name of any column you want, and that's the name of the select tag, essentially. So really useful function, but it wasn't that trivial to create. If this is where you started for the week, which would be a reasonable place to start, this is probably just not making a lot of sense. But in the weekly content, I made a much more simple video about this is what functions look like. Here's a few common helper functions. This is a very, very useful one, but not the easiest example to follow, probably. So hopefully you can kind of see what I'm going for here. It's not a mandatory thing, but if you find this to be valuable, well, you might want to create your own function for dynamically creating option selects. It's a pretty cool function. So hopefully that makes sense, and good luck with the rest of the week.